Thank you all for joining in as you all are joining in with us here at Lead Simple for this afternoon. Wanted to welcome you. I'm David. I'm going to be your host today. As you're joining in and coming in, I would love to hear, throw in the chats as you're joining in, where you joining from, what what number of coffee are you on for the day, or what's the last thing you ate? So as you're joining in, want to hear it. Zero coffees. We got fourth coffee for the day. Okay. Third glass of Diet Coke. Cream cheese, no coffee yet. Quite a mix.
Any non-coffee drinkers in here?
Yeah, who are my non-coffee drinkers?
I'm one. I'm one.
Now,
Got
do
a
you
few
do any
more.
caffeine or just no caffeine?
Pretty much no caffeine. Caffeine and I are not friends. So
No.
there we go. Sam, I knew I liked you. I knew we had that in common. Had to be.
Awesome. Let's see. Who's the farthest one away so far? I'm Calgary. I'm trying to. Well, where are you at, Ben?
I'm down here in Houston, Texas. So
Okay.
not quite as far south as you can get and still be in the US, but getting close.
Yeah, not out of the Keys. I'm in Seattle, Washington area. If we
Okay.
split the difference, that's like what? Colorado-ish?
Yeah,
Yeah,
somewhere in there.
that'll be the center of our conference today.
Yeah, just about. But we've got some people, gosh, I think Kyle in Ontario probably takes the cake being farthest from the center.
Yeah, I
So
think so.
nice.
Vancouver, you're not too far from me. El Salvador. There we go. Yeah.
There we go. Nice. I saw some Mexico, some Fort Worth, Texas represent. Love it.
Awesome. Well, as you're all coming in, we want to get started and kick this off. So let's do introductions officially. So I'm David. I'm one of the account executives here with Lead Simple. I was born into property management before I even knew what it was. I was born and raised in a small town in Colorado. Grew up on in a trailer park. My dad owned a 20-unit mobile home park, which meant that his sons got to like mow and crawl under and fix like the utility tape, the heat tape, way before it was property management. My dad then went on to get a series of multifamily apartments. And back then, it was just all I knew was, hey, paint, help with toilets, repair. But I didn't know really about property management as a thing. And then I came to Lead Simple about a year ago. One of the things I love about working here at Lead Simple is their core to help people be more and become more than they ever thought possible. And I love seeing property management companies be able to hit above their weight class. So that's a bit about me. I've been here for just over a year. And we also have Ben with us today. He is our resident expert for this afternoon. Ben, you're going to be telling us about processes, especially lease renewals. But Ben, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the property management space for the better part of the last 4 years in any kind of official capacity. Previous to that, I'm sure like many of the people on this call, I was a hobby real estate interested person. I managed to purchase a couple of properties, had done a few burrs, listened to the Bigger Pockets podcast religiously, and learned as much as I could without really dipping my toes too far into the water. But then I had the opportunity to actually work with LeadSimple, and I was a team member at LeadSimple for 2 years. Had a wonderful experience working there. Moved on to some other opportunities, and now have opened up my own shop as a small consulting agency.
Awesome. And so you're what, a couple years into doing that now, helping
Yeah,
folks?
just short of 2 years. We are working with clients all over the country, all different sizes, shapes. We have some people who are as small as like 20 or 30 doors, and we've got some people who are up in the mid 2000s. So we specialize in process documentation and implementation. We help many of our clients with onboarding into LeadSimple, but we also build a lot of tech stack on top of that. So if you're interested in doing anything Zapier related, anything automations related, that's our jam. We love to talk about it.
Awesome. One more question. What's the best way I dip my toe into getting into processes? If they just kind of live in my head right now, where do I start?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think LeadSimple actually has a really helpful graphic. And I'm not sure if someone will be able to pull it up while we're talking about this, but there's a wonderful graphic that walks you through the cycles of property management and kind of gives you an overview of the key processes. And I found that to be incredibly helpful when I was first thinking about process management, because with most businesses, most companies, right, it's we have a somewhat cyclical relationship, but most of that is in our head. Yeah, here we go. Here's the
Yeah.
example. But these cycles illustrate really, really well how the business processes, right? How it moves through the business, how your new leads come in, and how all the various processes kick off. And there's a lot of other things that can fill in some of the empty spaces here, but this really captures the bulk of the way your property management business should work.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into the main thing we came for today, which is talking about our lease renewals. So, what you guys can expect to get out of today, and I think we had Mo facilitating, but we had some power go out. So let me actually rearrange things just a second. Let's pull up the slide deck here. I've got so many screens. I want to get to this one right here and start sharing with y'all today. So, um, what can you expect from this webinar today? Well, our goals here are first to really help you learn how you can potentially get ahead of the leasing frenzy. Now, Ben, I mean, that's kind of like a loaded question in itself. Can people actually get ahead of a crazy, hard, demanding season of property management? How do we get ahead of this right now? We
Yeah,
got spring, we got summer coming up. What does it look like to get ahead of the workload?
Yeah, it is absolutely possible. What it takes in order to make it happen is some significant planning and execution. So it's not something that you can just snap your fingers and then realize, but it very much is possible to build systems that diminish the overall number of hours that you're putting into this, and also try to preempt and get things kicked off for you ahead of time. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, the specifics of what that looks like, what LeadSimple can offer in terms of making your life easier. But yes, absolutely possible to get ahead of the leasing cycle and have a lot of your things pre-planned.
Okay. And the second thing we're going to cover is some of those tips and tricks, the things from a best practice perspective as we're looking at developing a great lease renewal process. You're going to highlight some of the inside secrets, some of the tips, tricks that make that lease renewal run smoother or happen more effectively. What is that going
Yeah,
to be?
all of the above. Run smoother, be more effective, be more streamlined, hopefully simplify. And also we'll talk briefly about some of the automations and tech stack that you can build on top of your process that will level it up even more.
Awesome. And then lastly, we want to highlight that we love question and answers. If you're looking at your Zoom screen, you're probably going to notice there's like a chat section and a Q&A section. We'd love it if you would commit to putting your questions and answers in the Q&A section. We'll save some time at the end. And yes, the recordings will be shared. We get asked this a lot, so don't worry if you had hopes to get somebody else in your staff or want to share this, we're going to have a recording. So with that, let's jump in. What does leasing season look like without a well-defined process? Where do folks kind of start if it's just in their head? What can they expect this spring and summer?
Yeah, well, the one word answer is chaos.
Mm.
Without having a defined process, it is chaotic at best. Um, Headed into a leasing season, you guys know this is really one of the busiest times of the year. Not only do you have your leases that are renewing that may have been stagnated through the winter months, you may be pushing those into the spring and early summer. But in addition to that, we're hitting the showing season. So you've got a lot of inbound traffic. Not only are you taking care of your existing tenants, you're hoping to bring in new deals, new tenants, probably new owners too. And obviously the whole business has to continue running and growing all year long. So headed into the season without a process, while it's not a recipe for failure, it definitely is a recipe for confusion. With so many different pieces up in the air, it's really hard to keep it all together. And I find that many people end up relying on spreadsheets and their emails and their Slack or their sticky notes to keep track of all of these different pieces. And that's just really not very practical. Ultimately, it ends up in major loss and a lot of confusion.
Yeah. Wow. Chaos. We definitely want to avoid that. Those of you that are with us, I'd love to hear in the chats, what's the most painful thing about lease renewals right now? What are you dreading, not looking forward to? And maybe how does that get better for you? We'd love to hear it. Love to hear those comments in the chats. Well, let's dive in then. Ben, I'm going to stop sharing screen here, and why don't you start walking us through the lease renewal process? What can it look like for folks?
Sounds great. Well, I'm going to dive in and we're going to look at a lease renewal process for a client that is actually one of my current clients, who I think you guys will appreciate some of the setup. And just to make sure, can you guys see my screen okay? Dave, is that pulling through for you?
Yep, perfect.
All right, so what you should be seeing right now is the lease renewal process. And what we're looking at here is kind of the back end of the process. Now, as a process nerd and process architect, this is where I love to spend my time. So I want to take you through a little bit of this because it's going to give you the overall perspective on what the process should look like. Before we dive in here, I want to give you just a little bit of a hot tip. When you're building processes, ultimately, all processes fall into the same basic structure. There's initially a research stage. There is some periods of inputs, usually. There's some execution where you have to do the things, and then there's the wrap up. And the lease renewal is no exception to these rules. So just to highlight exactly what that looks like, your upcoming stage is where you're doing your research. This is where you're going to run your CMAs, where you're going to look at your tenant ledgers. You'll look at payment history. And depending on how your lease renewal is set up, you may be seeking some input from your owner at this point or your tenant. You're likely to also be getting an inspection report of some type, or looking at the history of the property and how well that tenant has been taking care of things. Now, once you get through those initial stages of research here in the upcoming stage, this is when you get into your inputs. And the input stage of the process is usually one of the more time consuming, but also, thankfully, one of the places that you can bring in a lot of automations. So just to be abundantly clear, the inputs here for lease renewal are going to be feedback from your owner and feedback from your tenant. As you guys know, when you are running a lease renewal process, it's incredibly important that of course, you're always going to get feedback from your tenant. Sometimes, it kind of depends on your business structure, you'll also need to get feedback from your owner. Depending on how your property management agreement is set up, you will solicit feedback from your owner, usually via an email similar to this one. Like we reach out and we say, hey, owner, here's what's going on. This property is coming up to its lease end. Here's a few details about the tenant and the property. Here's what we're suggesting for a new rate. What do you want us to do? Or you could say something like this. If we don't hear back from you within this timeline, this is what we're going to do, right? It's super important that we set clear expectations. Now, I mentioned here that one of the things that you can do is automate portions of this process with owner contacts and reaching out to your tenant. And the way that I like to do that is using something that we call a reactive workflow. And effectively, a reactive workflow looks basically exactly like what we have just here. But rather than sending this email where we are posing the question to the owner or the tenant, instead we say, dear owner, dear tenant, here's a form regarding your lease renewal that we need you to fill out. Please check out this form. And we'd embed in this email a custom form which would take that owner or tenant to a jot form or a gravity form or some other similar form, where we could embed information from this process as we collect it. And what that allows us to do is when we send that form and the owner or tenant fills it out, then we are able to receive that information as they send it back to us and have it update the process. So as a for instance, we send out a message to the owner. We say, here's our recommended renewal rate, but we're going to give you a couple of options. You can pick our recommendation. You can pick, the flat rate, fill in your number. You choose what you want. And then you can do something, based on percentage, just to give a couple examples. And then based on that feedback, that would then get popped back into LeadSimple, and then you can approve it, or we can just send it directly to the tenant. Of course, it's probably more prudent to review it before you send it to the tenant, but just to illustrate some of the things that you can do here, that's one way that you can apply it. Similarly,
Yeah.
when you get to the, oh, sorry, go ahead, David.
Well, I was going to ask for those that aren't familiar with LeadSimple at all, like
Mhm.
how are these tenant first name, owner first name, how does that flow into an email? Can you
Yeah,
just talk a bit about how we're integrated with like their accounting systems and where that data is coming from?
absolutely. So LeadSimple is one of the very few softwares that's out there in the process space today that actually integrates with your management tools. And when I say management tools, what I'm referring to is what we typically think of as your accounting database. So this would be your AppFolio, your Buildium, your Propertyware, Rent Manager, and Rentvine. And those are the five softwares that LeadSimple currently integrates with today. And what that allows you to do with that integration is you effectively have big chunks of that database that are available to you here in LeadSimple. So what David's talking about, right here, you can see this field, right? Owner's first name. And this owner first name will pull from the right owner's name and automatically fill it in here. How does it know that? Well, LeadSimple is a CRM, but it's property focused. Everything's tied to the property. So if you think about your property as the central object, your owner contact information and your tenant contact information are tied to that property. So when we kick off this process for 123 Main Street, it automatically pulls in the names and contact information for your owners and your tenants. And there's other information that it pulls through too, like your current balances and other pieces of information as well. And that is how you would populate that kind of information.
Yeah, so when you talk about research and needing to get ahead of my lease renewal and then inputs, I don't necessarily even have to fill in all that information, right? It gets sent out for me on my behalf. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. And one of the cool parts about this, obviously, aside from the time saving benefits, is it makes it less likely for you to make mistakes, right? I don't know about you guys, but I have certainly copied and pasted contact information before and missed a letter, or looked at something on one screen and typed it out without looking at the other screen and misspelled something. And this allows you to always make sure that things get sent to the right people, that you spell their name the right way, and that the information is always correct.
One more question in the research phase. That's the first part of getting lease renewals dialed in. Is there a way that LeadSimple can like alert me or let me know when to start these lease renewals so I don't forget about that or drop that ball?
Yeah, another great leading question there, David, but I love it. LeadSimple does have an incredible feature called the autopilot rules. And autopilot rules allow us to predict when we need these processes to begin. And if you're all familiar with any type of no-code programming like Zapier or let's see, I can't recall the name of the other one that's popping in my mind, but in any case, soft programming here, you're able to create rules around different things happening, right? If I want something to happen on a specific day, I can create rules or governances that allow only the right action to happen. And here in LeadSimple, we can create specific rules around properties and units. So we'll have to say, as an example here, we're only kicking this off if this is an active unit and it's currently tenanted and it belongs to someone who is currently a client of our company. Also, the lease end date falls within a specific time parameter. Additionally, we can exclude properties that have these processes active. And this is super important, right? If you have someone who's currently in delinquency or is currently under eviction, we don't want to kick off a lease renewal process for them. They do not
That makes
qualify.
sense.
Right? Similarly, there are other scenarios where you have just kind of weird things that happen where your data can be a little bit funky in your accounting system, perhaps. And so we can exclude things like an onboarding or an offboarding so that these processes don't automatically kick off for you. But this allows your processes to kick off in bulk at the time that you need them to, instead of you having to go and remember or have a reminder on your calendar to say, got to start the lease renewals today. Because who knows, that day may end up being on a weekend. You might be missing it by 1 or 2 days, or maybe it just disappears into the everlasting hole of your checklist. And this way, it never gets forgotten. LeadSimple always does it for you.
I don't know if you can speak to this, but Zane asked a great question. What's a good way to keep track of tenants that renew month to month?
That is a
Having trouble
great
catching
question.
those every 12 months. What's a way
Yeah.
that I could design a process around that?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to address this, Zane. If you are a LeadSimple user today, I'll kind of answer the question with that perspective, but there's some other things that you can certainly do in your accounting software as well. Specifically, if you are a LeadSimple user, to capture your month-to-month tenants is incredibly key, because what will happen if you don't is that this process will just kick off every month for your month-to-month tenants, and that's going to be very, very unhelpful. Again, depending on your particular accounting software and how your lease end dates are recorded, that's going to dictate a lot of exactly what happens here. But in general, the way to approach this is to create a sub-process. As I just showed you a moment ago, you can create autopilot rules that exclude specific units from kicking off a process. So the way that I would do this is I would go over here in your stages and workflows. I would have a month-to-month outcome. And just to be fair, no, not throwing anybody under the bus, but this client didn't want that. We customize our processes based on what the client needs are. But in that month-to-month scenario, I would add a stage here where I would kick off my month-to-month process, and then I would add it to the exclusion list over here. Now, that month-to-month process is its own separate and complete thing, and it's effectively a miniature lease renewal process. The way I like to structure mine is with a timeline of anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and it runs on a cadence. And every cadence, we reach out to the tenant. We say, hey, you were on a month-to-month lease. You're paying more money than you have to. If you'd like to save some money, let's get you on a regular lease. And we reach out to them. I like to send a form, say, are you interested in saving money? And they say yes. Great. That pops us right back here into the process where we run a standard lease renewal and get their lease updated.
Hmm. And what about building in a rent increase? Maybe like every 9 to 12 months.
Yeah,
Would you do that
absolutely.
with that process as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's honestly more of a policy question, and you have to look at your local market and what your market can sustain. But if we're thinking purely from the math side of the equation, yes, it would be really easy to build in some simple tasks to remind you to increase the rent over time. At minimum, you get them on a month-to-month fee and perhaps even a month-to-month increase, 10% above base rent or something like that. But in your lease renewal process, you're already going to have your task to run a CMA, look at the current market values, and then get them on a current rental rate based on the supporting market.
Awesome. Love it. What's up next? So we talked about researching, getting the process kicked off. We talked about getting some inputs and being more proactive rather than reactive in how you're, addressing owners, giving them some choices and leading them. Where to
Yeah,
next?
so
You said execution.
yeah, execution. That's exactly right. So executing the lease, right? Now, if you think about the lease renewal, there's multiple outcomes. In fact, I'm going to flip over to a different tab here for a moment just to illustrate what this could look like. And you can see here in these first stages, the upcoming stage is our research, our owner and tenant offer. This is where we're gathering our inputs. And when we're sending the lease, or we're in this delayed lease signing and our lease wrap up, this is really our execution phases of the lease renewal process. Execution to me is about getting stuff done, right? And at this point, we have all the information we need to have. We've gathered all the inputs that we need to collect. Now we just need to get the stuff done so that we can wrap this up, right? And that's really the final portion. Well, I'm sorry, not the final portion, rather the third phase of this particular type of process. And of course, the execution is going to vary. It depends on what you do for your business. A lot of people like to send their leases through their management software, which makes sense. You have an integrated tool there, and most of the time they do a really good job. There's also other opportunities to dig into alternative softwares like PandaDoc or DocuSign, or even JotForm has its own signing tool, which I can't fully endorse, but it's they're headed in the right direction. So there's lots of different technologies that are out there and available to help you make this whole process a little bit easier.
What are some of the mistakes or challenges you've seen clients having before, bringing in some of those tools to get the execution consistent?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the challenges that are often faced in the lease renewal process is lack of consistency. Um, I know that many of my clients have come out of the COVID phase, as have I'm guessing many of the people on this call, where doing lease renewals was potentially impossible, right?
Hmm.
The laws were temporarily changed, and regardless of what your opinion is on any of that, the reality is that the businesses had to change as well to make sure that they could get through that period of time. So coming out of that out of that period of time, there were many people who hadn't run renewals in multiple years, and they just had tenants who were sitting on month-to-month leases. And ultimately, that was causing buckets of chaos, right? Like we talked about a few moments ago. If you're headed into this without any documentation, it's a mess. But if you've been in it for multiple years and you're just hanging on, it's even worse. uh,
Yeah.
so, as far as the specific problems, consistency is a big one. Not having a good process or any type of a way to keep your team accountable definitely leads to massive inconsistency. Leases getting completely missed revenue opportunities, right? If you are running a lease renewal process, that means you're putting work into this equation, which means you need to get paid for that. So you should be charging a lease renewal fee.
Hmm.
You're missing out on income for your business just in that alone. And again, depending on your company, those renewal fees could be anywhere from 100 to maybe even like $400. And if you multiply that times the number of properties that go through a lease renewal every year, which should be every single property that you manage,
Yeah.
there's a significant revenue opportunity that you may be completely missing. Now, granted, some people are like, well, I've got my month-to-month leases and I'm making that extra month-to-month money. Nothing wrong with that. I can totally understand that. I think it's important, however, just to remember that as property managers, you are fiduciary, right? So you have a fiscal responsibility to your clients. And while month-to-month leases are acceptable and legal, I always encourage my clients, let's try to minimize the month-to-month. It is a revenue source, but it's not necessarily stable for the long term. And as entrepreneurs, aren't we all looking for a stable long-term business? I would say so.
Yeah. Reducing the cost of the revolving doors in and out,
Yeah,
more and more tenants and more wear on the assets themselves, I imagine, as well.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, then talk to us a bit about the last phase, wrapping it up. What are some of the success stories and achievements that folks can really expect with a great lease renewal process? And how do I know when it's done? What does that give for me as peace of mind?
Sure. So the wrap up stage or the wrap up phase of the process, I should say, typically consists of all the things that you need to do after you've got all your inputs, right? So we've already heard back from our owners and tenants. We already know if we're having to send a lease or not. To me, wrap up is all about cleanup, right? It's the bussing the tables, it's the sweeping the floor, it's the making sure everything is back where it's supposed to be. We're making sure that the right fees have been charged, that we have sent out the right updates to the right people, right? If we had a tenant who signed a lease, we want to let the owner know that that property is occupied and that they are going to continue receiving that mailbox money every month for the next year. So to me, the wrap up is about kind of fulfilling your expectations. When we start this process, I think it's really important to set clear expectations with your owners and your tenants. Here's what's coming next. Here's the timeline that you can expect it in. Here's all the specifics of what we'll be doing. Here's what we're expecting from you. And then when we get to the wrap up, we follow up on everything that we previously said. So the wrap up can consist of kind of your positive outcome where we renew the lease, and then your negative outcomes where we unfortunately have some churn, right? We lose a tenant. But ultimately, you're using a simple stage like this, your owner tenant non-renewal, to figure out what's happening next. We send any kind of notice to vacate out that needs to be sent. We provide updates to the appropriate people. If your owner chooses to not renew, we let the tenant know. If your tenant chooses to not renew, we let the owner know. And then we can even bring in some customizations like this. This one's not fully built out, but you can build in some customizations based on the reason that the tenant is leaving, right? If you sent a little form and they said, well, we're moving out because this is too expensive, or because we're moving to a new location, whatever that might be, we can customize responses based on that feedback. And hopefully, if we can't retain the tenant in this property, maybe we can get them in another or refer them to somebody else where they at least stay within our general network.
Yeah, I imagine it's helpful to the owners too to just have better communication, know what's going on as soon as we get that information from the tenant back.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's certainly a truism, but having better communication in your processes is incredibly key. And it's such low-hanging fruit. All you have to do is write an email a couple of times, put together a few templates, and you can anticipate the vast majority of what communication pieces should happen in your process. And then, of course, if there's something that you miss, it's really easy to make changes. And that's one of the reasons LeadSimple is so great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope this was helpful. Ben, I've loved hearing just you breaking it down so simply that we need an initial idea of getting the research, the inputs, do we need to run a market comp? What does the tenant want to do? What does that look like for us? Getting those inputs, bringing in automation like a job form to make that simple, direct the owner, direct the tenant to the choices we want to make for simple. Go ahead, executing on that. Here is the lease that needs to be signed. Bringing in some automation, like you said, PandaDoc and DocuSign, and then finally wrapping that up to ensure that the tenant knows, hey, you're renewed for another year. This is your rate terms. You're locked in. You know what's predictable for you for the next 12 months, and letting the owner know, hey, we've secured another predictable source of revenue. That rent box money, you can plan on it for another year. Love it. Speaking of wrap ups, I want to just change gears here and look at one of our companies. So highlight on the screen, Colorado Realty and Property Management has been using LeadSimple for a number of years now. And one really cool thing that having all of your processes documented allows for is the ability to have kind of an end-in review, looking at, as you mentioned, that wrap-up stage and seeing what's cleaned up. Ben, these are real results from a current client. Tell me what you think about seeing these numbers. 7,900 processes, close to 130,000 tasks. What does that mean for companies to get this much work done and tracked?
Yeah, it is honestly incredible. I think many property managers get well, let's back it up. Many people and many business owners get trapped in the cycle of doing the next thing, and we never take a moment to revisit what we've done. There's a wonderful book out there. I would encourage anyone to read this called The Gap and the Gain, and it talks about measuring backwards, which is exactly what we're looking at right now. Stopping for a moment in time and looking at what we've done over the previous period, in this case, the previous year. This is very super important, right? It's an incredible number, number one, just to look at these details, but just to think of the impact that these had. That's something that we can't necessarily measure directly. What's the impact that this has had on the business, on the team, on the individuals that have interacted with your company and your processes? I mean, I love it. I think these numbers are incredibly telling. And oh yes, I'm sorry. The book is called The Gap and the Gain, and I'm blanking out on the title, but I'm sure someone can Google that and track it down really quickly. I'm sorry, on the author rather. But The Gap and the Gain, excellent book. But yeah, I love this. I love getting these reports from my clients and seeing everything that they've done in the previous year. So yeah, I love it.
What stands out to me, I was just reflecting the number in the middle, close to 130,000 tasks completed. This work has to happen whether or not I have good processes and automation in place, regardless, right? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. And most of the time, this is happening in your head. You have
yeah,
130,000 tasks in your head. I sure don't. Talk
yeah.
about decision fatigue, right? That much, our brains are capable of a lot. But if I can remove 130,000 tasks outside of my head and put it somewhere that someone else can deal with it, that is a no-brainer.
Yeah, these are research tasks, these are input tasks, execution tasks, and wrap-up tasks, all lined out for you. Whether it's gathering information and collecting it, communicating the information out, advancing a process or a task through a workflow, or just that final communication that, hey, we're done. Good job. We can wrap it up. It's a lot of peace of mind here. And so for those of you that are kind of curious where you're at in the lease renewal stage, I think it might get busier. I'd love to hear in the chats. Curious if you think it's going to get more of a tenant market this coming year or landlord market. Either way, if you'd like to know where you're at with your processes, we've got a great assessment tool. It's free. It takes 3 to 5 minutes, and it's going to highlight 4 areas for you. If you scan the QR code and you go through the assessment, first, you'll be looking at client experiences. Where are we at from our client's perspective, our owners and tenants? How are we doing currently today as a business? Then, where are we at with my team experience? How are my employees experiencing work and task management? How are we at actual execution, completion of processes and tasks? And then what's your growth engine look like? So any of you curious, if you'd like 3 to 5 minutes to really explore, we've created a great tool to really assess today, what does the state of our business look like? And then for those of you that are interested in exploring LeadSimple and processes, potentially improving a lease renewal process, bringing in that approach of a systemized way to get those tasks done, go ahead and scan the QR code. We book demos, so you're going to meet with someone like me, an account executive here at LeadSimple. No pressure. We just jump online with you, go through a screen share, really customized to you, and start to allow you to ask questions and explore what using LeadSimple looks like and how that integration might map to your business and your team. With that, really want to go to Q&A. So for those of you that have more questions, please put them in the chat. Ben and I will be on. I know we slated this to last about 8 more minutes. So for those of you, we'll go through the chats, also the Q&A. Love to hear questions.
Yeah, I can see one question here already from Ming is, how much is the LeadSimple software? David, I'll defer to you on that one.
Yeah, great question, Ming. So we've got a couple plans. We've got a CRM only plan, which is really focused on building a sales engine and growth. Then we have the operations plan that we've been looking at today. Based on month-to-month fees, to get your particular pricing, Ming, I need to talk to you about door count and stuff like that. Those conversations are best held with an account executive, one of our sales folks here at LeadSimple. So if you're interested more, I would love to connect with you on a demo. Book a demo and we can give you specific pricing exactly to your company. Great question. Any other questions here? Thoughts in the Q&A too, or the chat. Anyone left here? What do you guys think leasing season is going to bring this year? Is it going to be higher demand of tenants, more applications to sift through, less? What are you all thinking as you are out throughout the country, boots on the ground, wrapping up or ramping up, I should say, for lease season this year? What are you anticipating?
For what it's worth, while we're waiting on some folks to respond here, I've certainly found with my clients that yeah, in general, people are wanting to stay put. They're not moving around so much. However, at the same time, the rental market is expanding. I should say the renters in the market is expanding. So while we have less people who are wanting to move, we also have more people who are wanting to rent. And I think that kind of ties back to that interesting conundrum that we are in out of the country, where the demand for rental properties is increasing, and there's just not as much availability as there has been in previous years.
Interesting. We've got some good questions coming in now. Amanda is asking, can you reiterate your advice on the month-to-month suggestion, Ben?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the suggestion here, Amanda, is that you create a sub-process that handles your month-to-month leases. And you basically keep that process running for a set period of time. You decide what it is, but you use that process to exclude from your autopilot rules. So in your autopilot, you would, and I'll just screen share again here for a quick moment. If that's okay, David, I'll just take this over very briefly. Right back over here on your autopilot rules, you'd go down here to your active processes, your exclusion list, and just make sure that your month-to-month process was on this list to not kick off if it included a month-to-month process, and that would keep them out of that list.
Ben, while you're there, can you go over to the library? I want to answer for Jim Lagan. He asked, is it possible for one LeadSimple user to share their processes with another?
It absolutely is. Yeah, so if you have a process that you have built out, you can share those here in your library of shared processes. You can see various copies of processes that we have for this client. But if you have a particular process, let's just say as a, for instance, the lease renewal that you wanted to share, then you can go to your process settings and just hit share this process. And then that will generate a custom page here. You can edit this before you share it. And then if you hit the share button up here, it'll generate a link, or you can email it to someone directly.
Yeah, great way to do that. So Jim, if you're not active in the LeadSimple Facebook users group, lots of great active people there. Make some friends, see if they'll share any process with you. There's a lot of folks that are very active and doing just that with our library. Autumn, what is a good starting point for these build outs and preparing for new lease season? A good starting point for build outs and preparing for the leasing season.
Yeah, that's a great question, Autumn. Ultimately, getting into these processes can be a bear. It's a big project. It's not something, like I said, that you can snap your fingers and it just happens. But if you want to get started, the place that I would encourage you to begin is with documenting your processes. If you don't already have a written process, all you need to do is grab a sheet of paper or hop on your Google Docs and just start writing it all down. I'm a very linear type of thinker, so I like lots of bullet points and just kind of walking through the specifics of each task and some of the conditionality that may fall into it. You know, if this is true, then we do that. If this is true, then we do that instead. That'll be an excellent spot to start and would give you a massive leg up as you're headed into implementing LeadSimple for yourself to use.
I recommend it too. Get started, get some paper. We hear this all the time. You just got to start with documenting it. You can sketch it out. I recommend paper or a whiteboard of some kind, because as you start plotting out your process, you're going to realize maybe there's some extra boxes, some extra steps. That is the first step, Autumn. It is really just, what's my current state? Writing out those processes. Then you can imagine, where do I want to get them with automation, standardization. Cherry is asking, what percentage of lease renewed is considered successful?
That's a tough one. That's kind of a market specific question. So I'm gonna pass on that one. But I'll say this. When it is important to clearly define what the successful outcome is. I know this was something that I had to kind of wrap my head around when I was initially diving into this space. I didn't understand that for most PMs, having a month-to-month lease wasn't considered a successful outcome. So it is important to clearly define what are the outcomes so that you can measure them. As far as what percentage of leases renewed is successful, like I said, that's more of a market specific question. So I'd say it's worth looking into your local market, chatting with other PMs. I have found that even your competition is often willing to chat with you if you can reach out with an olive branch and have a good conversation with them. So that's where I would start.
Yeah, great feedback. Cherry, I would add maybe reframing the way you look at completing lease renewals to, at least are we getting them all wrapped up and do we have feedback? So I think that's also a great starting point, is if we're not renewing leases, are we building in a mechanism to get feedback, as Ben mentioned? Hey, would you share with us why? Are they moving because it's too expensive? Are they moving because it's a natural move out of state? Helps us understand where we're at with potentially why we're not renewing all of them across the board. More questions here. Ben, what is your preference for gathering owner/tenant feedback? Jot forms, Google Forms, something else?
Yeah, job forms is by far my favorite for a multitude of reasons, but I could talk about job form for a long time. So I won't do that, but I would certainly encourage you to look at job form over Google Forms in short, just for your ability to customize, build in conditional logic, and really create a form that reflects your company versus Google, which is what Google Forms will do for you.
And for those not familiar with any forms, this is like information I could put into an email, kind of that surveying information. Choose A or B, correct?
Yeah, exactly right. Just honestly think of any time that you go onto a website and you want to say, I'm interested in this thing. Even if you go onto your own websites, you're going to have a form of some type where people can submit interest in working with your company. And oftentimes those forms are built into your website using, whatever your web hosting tool is. But JotForms is a great way for you to customize that. And you can actually build out custom HTML forms in JotForm that you can insert into your website and other places.
Awesome. I quick time check. We got a few more questions. You around up for answering two or three more
Yeah,
questions?
I've got a few more minutes before I have a hard stop. So
Okay. Sarah asked, can we build out a process for commercial lease renewal, or is it really, do we just add it to the renewal process? So what
yeah,
does it look like for commercial?
yeah, such a good question, Sarah. So with commercial leases, oftentimes your lease terms are different than your typical residential lease. So while technically speaking, your data is going to be stored the same way in your accounting software, and LeadSimple wouldn't pick it up until the right time. What I have found is that for commercial leases, usually the terms and the process is different enough that it actually makes sense to have a separate process specific to your commercial leases. So you still have owners and tenants, but your workflow is going to be a little bit different. So I would build that separately. You could, technically speaking, build a conditional scenario in your existing lease renewal process if you wanted to consolidate. But again, in my experience, when we're looking at residential versus commercial versus short term versus fill in the blank, all of these different sectors of the management business are ultimately run a little bit different. So I think it's worth documenting those processes separately.
Okay. Tina's asking if there is any chance you can share a process that got shown. I don't know. I know you're working with your client, so
Yeah, unfortunately, this one is proprietary. But if you'd like to reach out to me, I do have some templates that I'd be happy to share with you to get you started. It wouldn't be the one that we just looked at, but one with some similar logic.
and Ben, what's the easiest way that they can communicate with you?
Yeah, just hop on my website. It's blacksheepglobal.net. Maybe somebody could pop it in the chat. Blacksheepglobal.net. Feel free to just reach out to us on a contact form there and ask about a lease renewal process. Be happy to chat with you, and we can definitely help you guys out.
There we go. There's the site. It just popped in the chat. And last question, Ming is asking, does the software, so I'm assuming LeadSimple, have a way to identify tasks that have already been handled in the past? Example, if we change a water heater from 2 years ago to a property, we be able to know this somehow?
Yeah, such a good question, Ming. This really dives into the deep, dark recesses of what you can do with LeadSimple, but yes, it is absolutely possible. So in LeadSimple, you have various objects, is what they're called. So you have properties, processes, units, contacts, and leads. And each of those objects, you can store information on it in what's called a custom field. So the scenario that you're describing here, being able to identify whether something has happened in the past would be tied to a couple of pieces of information. Number one, you need to have a specific date, and that's probably the key place to do it, is to record the date, the last date when a water heater was changed at the property. But this would even happen outside of LeadSimple. So like I said, we're diving into a lot of the automations that you can build, but it gets a little bit more complex than just storing that information in LeadSimple. At the worst case, if you just wanted to make something really simple, you can record a unit field and just create a custom field with a date that says the last date that the water heater was changed. And you can have that pop up in the process so you can check and see, all right, how long in the past was this date? 2 years or more? all right, we're going to change this water heater. But if you wanted to have conditions around telling you whether or not the water heater needed to be changed or not, that'd be a little bit more complex. And I could certainly help you with that if that's something you wanted to dive into.
Ben, thank you so much. You have shared a wealth of information. Thank you all for attending the webinar. Again, we will be releasing a recording. And Amy is saying the favorite part of the process is that you have a full record of all that has happened. That is huge. So, Amy, you're gonna be emailing out this recording. Is that correct? Just want to give nice, clear marching orders. Yes. So, thank you all for joining. Be on the lookout for the email. It will give you a recording of this webinar. And Ben, we'll be seeing you again. We really appreciate you.
Thanks so much. All right, take care, everybody.